Hello and welcome everyone. You're listening to SCORPodcast, a show by IFMSA Pakistan and MSAI India, where we dive into COVID-19 and human rights situation, particularly today talking about discrimination, hate crimes, and gender-based violence. I'm your host for today, and my name is Abra Zahid. And currently, I'm serving as National Officer of SCORA, that is, Standing Committee on Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights, including HIV and AIDS, and I'm also working in international team as Pura Development Assistant for Member Engagement. With us today are the four speakers, and they are Ishika Kaul, Myra Anwar, Zoya Ijaz, and Mohammed Ibrahim. Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We can go for the brief round of introductions first for our audience. Can you all just start by introducing yourself, your IFMSA positions, how have you all been doing, how have you been spending your quarantine days, and what are your hobbies? And we start with Myra first.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me on the podcast. I'm the Assistant Nora in IFMSA Pakistan, and I mostly advocate for SRHR, Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights. And I'm also the local VPCB in my LC in my college. I'm a fourth year medical student, and I'm honestly, this quarantine, I'm thankful that I'm with my family, that I managed to come home. So I've kind of been spending time with my family, attending online classes, advocating a lot on IFMSA, and catching up on the novels I want to read.
Thank you so much, Myra. And now we go towards Zoya.
Hey everyone, this is Zoya, your local officer on human rights and peace from IFMSA AIMC LC and GA to the VPI Pakistan. I'm in third year of MBBS and I'm a very vocal human rights enthusiast. I like to debate and read and watch movies and seasons. Recently, I've took up painting and cooking to keep busy in this quarantine. And I've also started a 100-day challenge to write something new each day. So I guess that's it.
Thank you so much, Zoya, and good luck for that. Ishika.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me on this podcast. I'm very, very happy to join all of you. So, I'm a third year medical student from India, and currently I'm working as the National Officer on Human Rights and Peace in my country. So, I've been spending my time developing activities, trying to help people understand human rights issues more, especially now that they have increased. Also, I've been spending my time learning how to drive, so it's been really nice for me going out on a drive with my family almost every day. uh, and lastly, I would say that I'm catching up on some sleep and my old novels. So yes, I'm kind of trying to make my quarantine productive. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ishika. And finally, it's Ibrahim.
Hi everyone, I hope that you are doing well. I'm Mohammed Ibrahim Khan and I am from IFMSA Pakistan. Currently, I'm serving as the General Assistant to the Vice President Internal Affairs, and apart from that, I'm also the President of my LC. I would not lie, initially this pandemic was like very tough on me, but I guess we all adapt, so I adapt as well. And I'm trying to make sure that I invest most of my time into something productive and and like when I'm going to tell you about my hobbies, it would be like really ironic. But yeah, apart from that, I'm trying to invest my time in working for IFMSA Pakistan. And I'm also investing a lot of time watching YouTube videos, particularly food videos. And I don't know why, but like they're very addicting. So yeah, I guess that's all from my end.
Thank you so much, Ibrahim. And let's talk about our topic for today. Outbreaks of diseases often have gender impacts. Since the coronavirus outbreaks, news reports from a number of countries have reported bias, racism, xenophobia, and discrimination, especially in regards to hate crimes and gender based violence. In this podcast, you'll hear human rights enthusiasts discuss how the COVID 19 pandemic has impacted fundamental human rights all over the world and the things they have learned along the way. So, diving right into our conversation without wasting any more time, Ibrahim, what do you think of discrimination and hate crimes in general and in view of pandemic?
Okay, so Abra, I feel that to be honest, like discrimination is a subject that very well depends on how one perceives it. So it is very subjective in its nature. However, I would like to put it together as some like a sort of behavior or thinking pattern that is exerted towards individuals or communities based on a distinction. And that distinction generally gets its base from gender, race, religion, social class, or any other factor that is like, distinguishing them from the rest of the community. So yeah, I feel that discrimination in itself is like exerted in a lot of ways. It could be positive discrimination, it could be negative discrimination. However, at the end of the day, all forms of discrimination are somewhat implying that the community itself won't be self-sufficient or is a vulnerable part of the society. And I feel that this is something that really needs to be addressed. So we've noticed like negative discrimination actually specifically plays a huge role in making things tough in the society. So it leads to a lot of hate crimes specifically, and these hate crimes they have like significant and like diverse range of psychological consequences on individuals, on targeted groups, on different communities, specifically those communities in which we have multicultural settings, because these communities in turn see a lot of divisions and a lot of factions rising in response to these hate crimes. So yeah. Apart from that, we also identify that we also know that there are not a lot of legal defenses within the systems against these hate crimes, and this is something that was being addressed before the pandemic globally through different movements, through different NGOs, etc., etc. However, since the pandemic began, these discussions went into hiding. They were like sidelined, and this is something that was like sensitizing people before about the intensity of the situation and how worse it is like no longer there. So I feel that this pandemic played a role in like halting the progress that was made thus far, and it's getting it undermined. But apart from that, I also feel that these hate crimes are increasing every day, and there are a lot like pandemic has a huge role in it, because before the pandemic began, people were investing their time in different work. They had different channels through which they were having catharsis. They were getting rid of their negative energy that was like inside them. However, now all of their energy, all of their emotions are piling up. We are seeing that the mental health of people is being deteriorated, and all these factors combined are actually leading to an increased magnitude of these hate crimes. And these hate crimes are also going unaddressed by these state institutions, particularly because they also have to be careful at their end. So the police itself, let's say if we talk about police itself, they cannot operate the same way that they were operating before the pandemic began, because now they have to adhere to certain SOPs. They have to make sure that they are also safe, and like they're not contributing to the spread of this pandemic. So I feel that all of these factors combined is like leading to like lot of worse situations, with hate crimes being multiplied, the discussions or discourses we were having beforehand being compromised. So I feel that this is something that we need to work on and address, because it is harmful for the society in the longer run.
Okay, thank you so much, Ibrahim. And specifically, it is really important to mention one thing over here, that with this particular pandemic, because everyone is so confused about all the situation that is happening, even though they want to stand for these particular people who are going through all this discrimination, even then they are having this problem where they cannot stand just the right way they could have when the situation was in a better place. So, Zoya, what do you think? Has this discrimination existed for years, or it's just the outcome of the tense situation due to the pandemic?
I think, Abra, to a very huge extent, all of these prejudices and discriminations have already existed in our society. Like, they have just casually occupied corners of our lives, and they just lay there unnoticed and unspoken about, unless and until it happens to us. And I think it is just one of the most fundamentally wrong things with our society, that we only get selectively outraged and we exhibit selective empathy, and that we forget to care much for those that are not as privileged as us. And if anything, this stress and this fear of the unknown and this uncertainty and this anxiety that COVID-19 has brought us, has only put forth these discriminations in front of us, and, have provided those that want to see and those that have their eyes open with some clarity. Like, I see my world like the faulty machine to which stress was applied, and the system just exasperated all of these pre-existing discriminations in the society. So, what exactly has happened due to COVID 19? What has happened is that the marginalized people have become even more marginalized, and the human rights issue have become even more urgent. But unfortunately, as Ibrahim has said, as they have become more urgent, the busier the states and we have gotten with this pandemic. And as a result, it is still going to a large extent unnoticed, and not much is being done to control these discriminations and hate crimes. COVID-19 has just taught us things. It has taught us how in a capitalist system, most things do not affect the poor and the rich in the same way, and that the unfair allocation of resources by the government is real, that sometimes the center of the state is itself racist, and that is reason enough that there is not going to be equity in our societies. And it has highlighted the role of clerics and leaders in dealing these issues. So for me, COVID has become just one big humanitarian crisis that is yelling in our faces that these are the things that are wrong with your society. So you can either, brush them under the carpet or you can do something about them.
Okay, so now that we talk about the pre-existing discrimination and how this COVID situation has made this even more evident for all of us, are there any sort of new discrimination issues that you have noticed or you want to talk about, or it's just the previous one that you are saying?
As far as genesis of new discrimination goes, obviously there have been some, like some of these discriminations, as I see them, are quite new and are a direct result of the COVID-19. Like, we have seen this anti-Wuhan narrative in China itself. We've seen people all over the Chinese states and cities such as Shanghai close their restaurants to people from Wuhan, and signs of no mobile vehicles allowed have been very common. The people from Wuhan have been the subject of online harassment and bullying too. So it is quite ironic when we see that while the rest of the world is indulging in an anti-Asian narrative as a result of COVID-19, the people that are the most affected, the Chinese, are themselves indulging in an anti-Wuhan narrative and are also discriminating against them. So the whole thing is just very ironic, and discrimination is such a worldwide occurrence. And I think our systems have just failed to protect the victims.
Okay, thank you, Zoya. So we're talking about the anti-Asian narrative, and there have been some comments that have been noticed in the news in the past as well. And now, after this pandemic, there have been more and more cases been reported in this particular regard. So, Ibrahim, would you like to specify the anti-Asian narrative for our listeners and what exactly it is and how it has been specified in this particular condition and situation?
Yes, Abra. So to address your question, I would say that it is alarming that, in the beginning, like because in the beginning, people associated this virus with the Chinese lineage. It led to a lot of, hate against these Chinese community, and then it led to people drawing analogies that, maybe it's the Asians in general who are spreading this virus or something like that. Getting my point? So I feel this is something that multiply the impact of discrimination within the already within the infrastructure of these multicultural communities, right? But apart from that, we could also compare it if we draw an analogy between this current situation and the situation with the HIV back in the 80s, when HIV originated and when it was first identified publicly, right? And we know how it was like linked with the homosexual community, and people and the general public started viewing like these communities as the carrier of disease, and like people belonging to these communities were discriminated against at a lot of different levels. They used to face bias in political infrastructures and social infrastructures and healthcare infrastructures. So I feel that to an extent it is similar in a way, because these Chinese people are or these Asian people in a lot of different countries are also facing the same biases that they once faced, right? So I feel that when such things exist, this in turn does is that this in turn makes these communities feel isolated in a lot of different domains, and a lot of different stereotypes generate about these communities within the society in general, and it in turn hinders the discourse that they are having about human rights or their rights in specific, right? And it compromises on the productivity that they could through which they could contribute to the society, right? So, and this is very alarming because it in turn then leads to a lot of xenophobic feeling and sentiments within that community, and ultimately it just like destroys the community from within. So I feel that whenever there is a need to tackle this anti-Asian narrative, and there is a need to spread more awareness about it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ibrahim. And specifically talking about the anti-Asian narrative in which you mentioned xenophobia, I think this is very important to understand and realize the construction of racial identities through exploring questions of democracy, liberalism, and modernity in lives of the youth. So what we can discuss now is about xenophobia. And I think, Zoya, it would be great if you can give your stance on xenophobia for our audience.
Abra, I think xenophobia in the context of health is the negative association between a person or a group of people who share certain ethnicities and a specific disease. Like in the case of COVID-19, the virus originated in China. So people of the Asian descent have been the target of xenophobia. So naturally, we have seen people be labeled, stereotyped, discriminated against, or treated separately. And collectively, they have, I think, experienced loss of status, all because of a perceived link with the disease. So naturally, increase in acts and displays of xenophobia, as well as prejudice, xenophobia, discrimination, violence, and racism against people of East Asian and Southeast Asian descent, and its appearance around the world can be seen. What I find interesting is that it is not entirely unprecedented. We've seen with the pandemic of cholera how the Indian people were marginalized, and cholera was associated with the people of Asian descent too. And even then, the very similar pattern of racism and xenophobia and discrimination could be seen. So for me, it's just very disappointing, really, how things have not changed. And either collectively we have validated that xenophobia is okay, or we haven't done anything on a practical level to prevent it or stop it. And for me, both situations are just very extremely saddening. I mean, this xenophobia obviously comes from a place of illiteracy, right? And the people of Asian descent that have lived their entire lives in other states have been blamed for the virus, and their daily lives have been so affected by this. So I think unless and until states promote cultural understanding, diversity, and tolerance, we cannot defeat this xenophobia or even begin to lessen it.
Yeah, that's very well put. Thank you so much, Zoya. Specifically, one thing I want to mention over here is that had been noticed in quite a while now is all the financial issue that is surrounding this pandemic, because people out here, they are not being able to go out and earn for their family, and there might be some people out there who might be just sole bread earner of their families. So this lockdown had affected in one way or the other to the whole financial situation of people. So what is your take on that? How has this lockdown and quarantine affected the financial situation of people in your eyes, and what sort of financial discrimination would you like to address? And do you think when we talk about xenophobia, how in that particular way it would have affected the refugees around us, or maybe how would you like to emphasize this point about Islamophobia and homophobia, considering this COVID-19 situation is here?
Okay, so coming to the refugees question, we collectively have made refugees a group of people that are fighting a battle for their basic human rights that we have been just privileged enough to be born with. And now, in lieu of this pandemic, all of the world, we see stories of what they have had to face, and it is heartbreaking. I mean, let's take an isolated example about Malaysia, where thousands of Rohingya refugees have been detained by the police, and they have hindered their rights to seek treatment and prevent migration. And the government has been, clearly defending it by saying that these are illegal refugees, so they have no right or basis to protest or ask them of things. And the entire thing is just so absurd when you look at it. I mean, refugees are human beings that are being denied the right to seek treatment. And maybe it just shows that we are nationalists above human beings sometimes. So COVID-19 for me has just, blatantly added fuel to the fire of anti-refugee sentiments. And when celebrities or leaders or people with influence make remarks without any check and balance, and they hide their nationalism behind the facade of patriotism, it just causes a bigger problem. And there's also been a rise of Islamophobia, homophobia, and transphobia. I personally think that sometimes people just do not know how to process the feelings of anxiety and fear in a healthy manner. So what happens is that they tend to resort to the only thing that they have been taught, and they resort to violence and anger and play the blame game in society. So ultimately, it is all about what surrounded them as they grew up and what they formed opinions about. And if those opinions have been, strong enough to resort to violence. So that is why we see that in areas of Muslim minority, they will be marginalized or even blamed for the spread of virus. In a conservative area, people of unconventional sexualities will be marginalized and blamed. Same goes with the increasing incidences of transphobia. Maybe when we are faced with a life-threatening situation, we just go to the basics of our primary learning and lose all inhibitions, and there is a fault in our primary learning. But then again, there's a big part of me that debates with this thought and blames individualistic choices too. I mean, you always have the right to understand things better and to empathize better and to be kind instead of just choosing to not be kind. Okay, so to talk about this in a better context, Abra, I'd like to take a South Asian model such as Pakistan or India intake because obviously I have better knowledge of it. So here, what we have been given in order to not get the virus or be infected by the virus is a series of directions or precautions, which includes social distancing, practicing hand hygiene, and in some cases, a lockdown to decrease the spread of virus. But what I think we just ignore or fail to understand is that social distancing of a middle class or upper class family living in a house or a bungalow is different than the lower class family living in a one bedroom quarter amongst many families and those living in the slums. State tells us the first thing of taking precautions is to self isolate in case we contract the virus. And I don't understand how there is any doubt in the inevitability of this familial spread in this housing situation. They tell us that the safe distance from each other is 2 meters, but again I cannot imagine a kid or a man or a woman possibly being able to precaution without living in those quarters or in slums. Even practicing hand hygiene is a privilege in a world where we live amongst water shortages such as seen in Yemen. While lockdown or a quotation open much needed break quotation closed for some, it is a literally life threatening situation for many others. I mean, let's take an example of a man living in an urban city in a South Asian country such as Pakistan, where he is a daily wager and he has 5 kids, a wife and a mother, and he's the sole breadwinner. A man that does not have the means to buy food for his family and his wife, his kids, his old mother is not going to care for a disease that he cannot see as he sees the hunger of his family. Sure, there is a chance that if he goes out and manages something, he might contract the virus. Yes, but there is even a bigger chance. In fact, there is a surety that if he doesn't go out, the family will starve. And that is how the whole idea that we are in the same boat with this pandemic is just absurd, because we may be in the same storm, but because of the socioeconomic privileges that some of us have, some are cruising in a yacht, watching TV and sleeping in beds, while most are in wooden boats, and some just hanging by a wooden plank. So, as far as the impact of the storm, that is COVID-19, is considered, every one of us is hit very differently. And that right there is how financial discrimination has always existed in our society, but in the light of this pandemic is even more clear for us to see.
Yeah, specifically mentioning about the fact that this has not been the first time that there had been this financial discrimination that exists around a pandemic or maybe a situation. So somehow there had been few lackings that we have noticed from our states, specifically talking about Asia countries, Pakistan and India, that we have a better knowledge about. Okay, so how about the discrimination in terms of health opportunities, if you would like to put some light on that for us?
Abra, as far as the healthcare standard and opportunities and access to healthcare is concerned, there is again a very huge gap to be seen depending on your social status. Especially at the start of the spread of this virus in our countries, the first testing to be announced and seen in Pakistan was a private testing for 8,000 rupees PKR, which is frankly a lot and accessible to only half the people. With the advent and gradual increase in free government testing, in parallel, the virus kept spreading too. So now we are faced by the problem of full capacity of beds and ventilators in our government hospitals. Now, like let us take an example where two people simultaneously get affected and there is no availability in a government hospital, right? So one of them is a rich person, the other one is a poor person. The richer person simply goes to our Khan hospital and pays 17 lakh for 10 days and just casually experiences unparalleled healthcare standards in Pakistan. But the second person who could not afford private healthcare was left to wait, and he just couldn't make it. And it isn't just about beds and ventilators. There has also been a very unreasonable price hike in basic necessities such as pulse oximeters, which has become a luxury rather than a necessity for care of COVID-ridden patients. And medicines that have been stocked by vendors and are being sold at unreasonable prices, and no regulations from the government are anywhere to be seen. Now, these are clearly some of the issues and reasons of disparity of healthcare between the people of different, socioeconomic structures in my country. And I'm sure that these may differ in different countries, but they will exist in most countries, if not all, really.
Thank you so much, Zoya. Actually, it was very well put, considering the fact that this pandemic has brought so many financial problems for all of us. And particularly talking about the two states that we can actually comment on really nicely, considering we know about them more. Somehow, there have been some glitches that have been noticed from the state side as well. So let's just have a stance on the states and leadership problems now. Ibrahim, will you like to comment on the leadership responses and effect associated with hate crimes and discrimination and its association with COVID-19, whereas the states are concerned?
Yes, sure. So, Abra, to be honest, given the current situation, I would say that we have seen instances where we've witnessed police brutality within our communities. We have seen instances where we have seen marginalization of a lot of communities. So I feel that overall and around the globe, like leadership is broken at this point in time. And if like we observe the response of these people towards this pandemic, I feel that the measures that they could have had adopted earlier weren't adopted as such, and due to that, it led to a far worse situation than could it could have been in otherwise scenario. So I feel that this is something that needs to be highlighted. But apart from that, I feel that another concern in regards to the debate that we are having right now is the idea of how these states or how these governments are manipulating the situation and using it to introduce a lot of different policies that they want to. So, for example, if I talk about things in Chile a few days back, the president of Chile, Sebastian Pinera, he made a statement that said that sometimes it's not just men who want to commit abuse, but also women who put themselves in such a position where they want to be abused. I feel that when they're making statements like these, when they're giving out narratives like these, they are telling these people who are committing these hate crimes, who are committing these uh, what this violence based on gender, that it's okay and that it's not entirely your fault when it entirely is their fault. I feel that this is undermining the entire narrative that people for human rights have been adopting and have been advocating for throughout the I would say throughout this century. And I feel that this is something that needs to be addressed. Apart from that, we've also seen a lot of governments, like particularly if I talk about Chile, that what they did is that they introduced a lot of policies and a lot of bills that are basically against the entire essence of what the women of Chile are working towards, right? And we've noticed that recently, like women of Chile have been marching against policies uh, for female genital mutilation, for gender politics, and a lot of other different things. However, due to this pandemic situation, all of the protests that they were, working towards and that they were uh, partaking in got dispersed, right? I feel that this entire situation is also being manipulated and for a lot of different governments on their part to adopt stances that they wanted, and these stances are in turn stimulating a lot of, I would say, hate crime and gender-based abuse and bias within these societies. So I feel that this is something that is also needs to be addressed in lieu with the human rights. Apart from that, I would also say that we've also seen a lot of different governments abusing this situation of pandemic and imprisoning a lot of people that they that they want to because of like their stances that they have or any other statements that they make. So I feel that in general, like these governments like are not only failing on a healthcare front to provide for these people, but are also manipulating and exploiting this situation at this point in time to get the ends that they want to. So I feel that this is something that is impacting the entire progress, the entire movements, the entire work that a lot of organizations, a lot of people have put towards the trying to make this world a better place and trying to achieve equality on all fronts. So I feel that this is something that we need to address as well.
Well, thank you so much, Ibrahim and Zoya, for your comments on this. And to be very honest, hate crimes not only affect the targeted individuals, but I feel the whole community. Sometimes it might just go unrecognized in some parts of the country or maybe the world where people are actually going through this and things are going unnoticed. But considering all the problems that people have noticed or maybe reported in some time, this is very important to understand and realize that states are somehow lacking in coming up with proper SOPs or maybe proper legislation of avoiding the situation where hate crimes are being promoted in one way or the other, considering the COVID-19 situation is on the peak at this particular moment. With this, we dive into our next point of the discussion, and that is gender-based violence and how it has been influenced by this particular pandemic. So, Ishika, over to you. If you had to introduce what gender-based violence is in just few lines for our listeners, how would you do that?
Thank you so much, Abra, for your question. So, first of all, what I would like to clear is gender based violence is not restricted to women and girls only. Gender is the social roles and the functions that society attributes to men and women in public as well as private life. So it does not necessarily mean that if there is gender-based violence, it is only victimization of our women, but it also includes the men, the boys, lesbian, gay, transgender, and non-conforming people. So that is something that we need to keep in mind. Now, I'll briefly talk about the types of gender based violence that are there. For example, we have sexual violence, which we know includes rape, sexual assault, harassment. We have physical violence, like women experience in domestic violence, like hitting, slapping, beating. We have emotional abuse. We have economic violence, for example, the denial of resources, of food, of finances. And lastly, we have harmful traditional practices like female genital mutilation, honor killings, and forced marriages.
Okay, so something that was really important and you did mention is that when we listen or just when we have about the topic of gender-based violence, mostly people associate it with women. But something that is very important to emphasize over here is that it's not just women, it can be men as well, and it can be other genders as well, which are usually more towards the discrimination faced by people, specifically mentioning about LGBTQI community. So yeah, which type of gender-based violence should be worried about during this pandemic, Ishika?
So, as we all know, the world has gone into lockdown, and all of us are confined to our households for the betterment of our health. So, at this point in time, intimate partner violence and domestic violence are particularly on a rise. So, one aspect of this can also be the deprivation of resources, the economic violence, and also the mental abuse that all of this inflicts. And one thing I would like to mention is it's not just the poor households, but also the affluent ones which experience such type of gender-based violence. And for the purpose of this podcast, we will mostly be talking about sexual and other forms of gender-based violence against women. So the most important ones would be, if I speak about according to the global data that we have seen before the pandemic came, gender based violence was already a pandemic in itself because almost 1 in 3 women experience this in their lifetime, and unfortunately, a lot of them do not end up reporting it. If I speak particularly of India, then there have been more than 30% of women who have been subjected to domestic violence at some point in their lives. Yeah, it's so disheartening that nearly 75% of these women who have reported did not seek help from anyone. And they did not end up confined, even if they ended up confiding in family members, it usually, the crime usually got brushed off as a private matter or a family matter that did not require any outside or legal intervention. So, being in this situation, I am pretty sure that this kind of violence is on the rise and will definitely bring out greater numbers and is affecting our women even more.
Thank you so much, Ishika, for specifically mentioning about the situation you have noticed in India. Let's have the same sort of comments, but in case of Pakistan now. And for that, I would like to forward it to Myra. So, Myra, would you like to present your stance in regards to gender-based violence when it comes to Pakistan?
In Pakistan, like India, the situation is very dire. All of the research that's been done on this before the pandemic is the statistics are chilling. Like 30% of women face physical violence, and that's actually an understatement, because the gender norms that we have in our society kind of means that reporting is just a quarter, not even a quarter, a very tiny fraction of the cases that actually are happening. Yes, in Pakistan, there are laws present to prevent violence against women, but the issue kind of comes with the fact that in our society, um, there's like there isn't enough resources to help them adequately. So yes, there are laws, but then the conviction rate is very low. If women are facing this situation, how are they supposed to get the legal aid for this? And the social norms kind of just build onto the gender based abuses, and it just keeps going on. And the reason that this pandemic, and this is a point that I want to make, that even though during this pandemic there hasn't been a focus in Pakistan that gender based violence is on the rise, because we haven't been able to do any research, obviously. Issue is, from the countries that do have systems in place where you can know that gender based violence or domestic violence cases are on the rise. For example, like in France, there was like a 36% rise in the calls to the domestic violence hotlines. You can kind of correlate that and kind of assume, or kind of use your common sense to know that yes, this is happening. Even though it's not being talked about during this pandemic, it is something that's happening, and it is something that we should be focusing on, and the help we should be providing these women should be considered an essential service.
Yes, exactly. Thank you, Mara. Specifically considering the fact that most of the time people just say it's a private matter and it's brushed off under the carpet like it never existed. That is something that is deeply rooted in both the cultures and in both the countries since very long. Not just this pandemic, but it had been quite a thing for like quite years now. So it will be great if we can have stance from both of you in regards to the socio-culture norms and traditions that affect this. So Myra, if you can just mention that which socio-cultural factors exactly make gender-based violence particularly a hard battle to fight in region, specifically talking about Pakistan. And then Ishika, you can give us your stance on India.
Okay, I want to make a clarification first, that even though gender based violence, as Ishika mentioned before, that it includes violence against all genders, in Pakistan, because of the social norms that we have, the gender norms that we have, women are more likely than men to kind of face this kind of violence. Yes, men facing domestic violence is a very prevalent thing and should not be little, but just statistically speaking, women are just more prone to this. The situation kind of forces them into, they're less likely to go out of the home, they're traditionally kind of confined in the home, they're less educated than men in our society. So this kind of traditional norm kind of perpetuates this problem, because it is a patriarchal society in Pakistan. Violence against women is actually kind of viewed as an acceptable form of discipline. As you mentioned, it's kind of like a domestic affair. No one kind of can come into the home and interfere with these matters, because it's just considered a domestic thing, domestic affair, gharelu mamla, right? So another aspect of this is that, for example, there was this study done on the Pakistani culture, and they kind of asked, like, participants, and 50%, more than 50% of them from Pakistan actually mentioned that they think it is right, it's an all right thing to do, for women to face physical abuse by their partners, by their spouses, as a form of discipline. So you kind of see that it's a problem that has very deep roots in our society, in the gender norms. And another thing that might be unique to Pakistan is that there the women were we're like associated with the honor of our household. So any action that a woman takes, it's kind of has an impact on the whole house. So that kind of goes and results in the honor killings that we see in the news every day, right? And again, all of this gender norms, all of this is just very pervasive. And the fact that it's being focused on in the pandemic doesn't mean that it's happening now. It's been happening, but the pandemic is just aggravating the problem. The cracks were already there in the glass, it's just breaking right now. And I want to take a moment to think that during this pandemic, during the lockdown, the only place that we're really safe from the COVID pandemic is our homes. But for these women, their homes aren't even a safe haven.
Yeah, that's very true. Thank you so much, Myra. And Ishika, would you present your stance in regards to India?
Thank you. So, as Myra mentioned, India and Pakistan are very similar in terms of our culture, and we face similar gender norms that have been placed by the society in India as well. So, like you guys mentioned, gender-based violence isn't something new for us. It has been prevalent in our societies for a very long time, and there have been some truly terrifying instances of such violence in the past as well. So I'd like to focus on the patriarchal belief that exists in our societies, especially about female household members being protected by the men, and them being perceived as victims or subjects rather than individuals who are first and foremost citizens, and they should be given equal rights similar to men and boys. So one more point I would like to mention here is it's not just that this female conformity to roles that have been defined by our traditional practices are enforced only by the men, but also by the women in our society. For example, our mothers, our mother-in-laws, or our grandmothers. There have been certain things that they have been teaching us for a long time. You can't go out at this time of the day. You probably shouldn't enter the temple or the mosque if you're uh, having your period. So, all of these things have been prevalent in our society since a long time. Also, like Myra mentioned, a similar study had been done in India where almost 52% of women and 42% of men believed that a husband justified in beating his wife as a form of discipline. And unfortunately, showing disrespect towards your in laws was one of the major reasons for this sort of beating. So it speaks a lot of the mentality that our society has, and how, even though it is the 21st century, we have been unable to move forward from these sort of norms, and they still haunt our women.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ishika. So this is something that is very important, and specifying this particularly over here is that it's not just the pandemic that had aggravated the condition. It had always existed in the past, and it's going to exist in the future if something is not done from our side, just to make sure that these things don't happen in the future. This is why we are having this conversation today. So yeah, let's just talk about how this pandemic has aggravated the whole condition now. So, Ishika, how would you say that COVID-19 pandemic has affected the gender-based violence in our societies? Apart from the fact that it had always existed, how would we emphasize on the pandemic situation on this condition now?
Yes, so like you mentioned, even before COVID-19 existed, domestic violence was already one of the greatest human rights violations that our society has seen. So what I would like to start with is certain facts, certain statistics that have been there in the global community. Like Myra also mentioned earlier, France has seen its 36% increase in the number of reported domestic abuse cases since they went into lockdown. In India, this situation is not any better. We've almost seen a doubling in the number of reported cases in only a matter of 2 months. Also, in China, a province recorded a tripling of domestic violence reports in February during the quarantine time. So, all of these, facts point to the certain factors that have influenced this particular rise in the COVID time. And one of the major ones would be the worldwide lockdown that we are facing. Also, previously, it was also difficult for women to come forward and share their stories and reach out for help. But right now, it's been made physically impossible because we're in lockdown, because access to services has been curtailed. Only essential services had been going on for some time. A lot of helplines, a lot of NGOs, they had to temporarily stop working. And this actually, we may not realize it, but the women who were facing this sort of abuse have also unable to confine NGOs. They had to temporarily stop working. And this actually, we may not realize it, but the women who were facing this sort of abuse have ended up facing a lot of difficulties at their homes, being confined with their abusers and not being able to do anything about it. So due to the stressors which are feeding this growing violence, like a lack of access to online services, smartphones, being confined to their households, police not being able to respond because they are so busy with other things, and also unable to confine the abusers in prisons due to spread of COVID-19 among them. So there are increased instances of women facing physical, emotional, and economic abuse. So the need of the hour is not just to take care of the health pandemic, but also not to start another, that is of gender-based violence.
Yeah, specifically talking about the gender norms that exist, and then talking about the COVID-19 situation. If we talk about the fact that women are those who are considered in our gender norms, someone who are running the family, right? Caring for her children, buying, cooking, storing food for the family, and all. So let's discuss about the fact that how the situation is feeding the stressors seen in violence against women during this pandemic. Myra, if you would like to comment on that.
Yes. Um, Violence against women has always been described as a shadow epidemic. It has always been, especially in our societies, it is endemic. There's no doubt about that. But the situation with the pandemic is obviously it's very hard on everyone, on our society, on our economy, and those kind of stressors all come together, and you do create an environment where, yes, gender-based violence is on the rise. Families are facing extreme economic hardship that takes a toll on people, being confined indoors all the time, having limited privacy. If a woman or a man, they're stuck at home with an abuser, and being with them 24/7 is not an ideal situation. And even when women have to escape from those kind of environments, they do need to have those windows of time to kind of go out or try to seek help. And what this pandemic is kind of doing is they're making that impossible, because the person who's abusing them, the person who is living with them 24/7 in your own home, so having that kind of escape route kind of becomes impossible. So what we also need to focus on during this pandemic is kind of think about those escape routes for women, like kind of doing more than what's necessary in like normal times, just to help them, using a lot of resources that we are using for the pandemic, like telemedicine, like just having apps and calls. And also the restriction of movements, unemployment, economic hardship, they're all just, they are having an effect on this epidemic that we are having. Yes, resource allocation is very understandable for the situation that is at hand, but it doesn't mean that all of the other things are just like unnecessary or should take like a back seat, right? Because this is life threatening for these women. You can't expect them to stay at home just because of just because of the pandemic, when their home is where their life is in danger. So we have to kind of think back to what they're facing, what kind of dangers they're facing being confined.
Also, I feel like the biggest dilemma of our societies in this particular situation is understanding and realizing that many people out there just think because we are not going through this situation, maybe it is not important for us to talk about it. Maybe it is not important for us to mention the cause and effects that are happening in the situation, or just like standing for someone else, right, who is going through it. So it's really, really important to understand and realize that just because it is not happening to you in the moment does not mean the other people who are going through this had this by choice. Well, in that case, Myra, why is only domestic violence being highlighted specifically in news during the pandemic? Women had been facing violence on the streets as well.
Okay, so there's a very important fact to know here. You know, like growing up, especially in Pakistan, you've always kind of heard of the dangers outside the home, like you're always kind of the stranger danger and everything. But it's really important to know that 80% of violence against women are done by family members or their intimate partners. So home is by far one of the most dangerous places for women in Pakistan, especially. So in this lockdown, so for example, if people are thinking that, okay, fine, the danger is outside the home, the danger is on the streets for women, this pandemic is, if you enforce a lockdown, okay, they're at home, they're safe. No, they're not. They're stuck at home with their abusers. Because again, I cannot stress this enough, most of the violence against women is done by their intimate partners, people they trust, people are those who are all around us.
Thank you so much, Myra. Specifically talking about the fact that this is something that is really important to mention over here, the dilemma, the biggest dilemma of our societies in this particular time is people thinking just because they are not going through this means that they never have to talk about it, or maybe they are not in a situation so they have an easy escape. But something that they do not realize in this particular moment is that whoever is going through situation did not have a choice, or they did not choose this for themselves. So it is very important for us to come out and talk about it, because maybe us talking about it might be a helping factor for other people out there. So in this particular regards, let's talk about how we as healthcare providers, as healthcare professionals, can play our role in this. And Ishika, would you like to present your stance on that?
Thank you, Abra, for the question. So, at an individual and community level, we can reach out to these women and, first of all, raise awareness so that they can break the silence and share their stories with everyone. Uh, then, secondly, as healthcare professionals, we can come up with a system for mental health counseling for helping other women around us in our neighborhoods. Secondly, what I would like to talk about is to look, listen, and link. That is, look and observe instances around you, listen to their stories, encourage them to speak up, and thirdly, to link them to government interventions or NGOs that will be working for this specific cause. Also, it's been shown by research that women often turn to friends and neighbors for help and usually don't go to formal services or authorities directly. So it's very essential that we as a society, especially medical professionals who are approached by everyone in our society, are accepting and understanding, and we can make them aware about what counts as violence and what is not acceptable behavior towards women, so that more women are able to recognize it and report it to their friends and their family, if not immediately to the authorities. Then we need to create a safe space, an open environment around them for the same. Here, I would like to talk about the rural areas specifically, where in this particular situation, I feel frontline health workers like ASHAs and ANMs who are already going door to door and conducting COVID assessments can act as a point of contact for the abused women. And along with panchayats and women self-help groups, they can work jointly to provide safety and security to these women. Also, if needed, these women can be shifted to safe spaces like shelters or hotels in urban areas. One more thing I would like to speak of is the role of social media. Like I mentioned earlier, the domestic violence cases are not limited to poor households only or one with low socioeconomic status. It is a sad reality, and it also exists in affluent background homes. So, assuming that these women will have access to online services, we can use social media effectively to create awareness amongst them and encourage them to reach out to all the newly created and the existing helplines and services that have been brought in for them during this pandemic. One such example is an Instagram video that has been going viral. It's about the domestic abuse hand symbol. And I have personally seen this video at least 5 times in the last 4 days. And even if we start this as a trend, lastly, I will speak about some NGOs that are present in India, like Sneha, Jagori, the National Commission for Women, and these NGOs have been providing helplines, shelters, collecting donations for reaching out to these women, especially during this time. Apart from having a helpline number, they've also introduced WhatsApp numbers for help reaching out to these women, as well as some NGOs have even created applications for them to download and reach out to help. Then, secondly, the government laws that are in place in India are there to tackle this problem and can actually help out women if they know about their rights. So, this aspect should also be part of our awareness campaigns where we let them know that there are existing laws in place that will save you, that will help you out and punish the perpetrators. So yes, I would like to end at that and hope that each one of us can, even if we are able to help out our maid or someone in our neighborhood who is facing this sort of problem during this pandemic, we will be able to put a stop to the sudden increase in the number of cases.
Thank you so much, Ishika, for sharing that information with us. That was really, really important. And now I think I'm going to have the same discussion with Myra for Pakistan as well in regards to the NGOs that are working in this particular regard, gender-based violence and domestic violence specifically. So, Myra, over to you.
Okay. So I want to specify that there is some legislation in Pakistan for victims of domestic violence. But the issue again is that those women don't have the access to legal aid. Like it's inapproachable. The laws aren't implemented. So there are NGOs in place that have been working and they do offer free legal services to such women. And it's really important that us as a community kind of know who to link with whom, right? So yes, you can be vigilant and you can kind of notice what's going on around in your community. So like it's shown like in studies and research that women usually when they are facing such dangerous circumstances, they don't access formal services themselves. They actually turn to their neighbors or their friends for help. So what you can do is kind of have the knowledge at hand that which ones can we link them to. So in Pakistan there are NGOs working. There's Audit Foundation, there's Rozan, there's like legal services like Sindh Legal Aid, there's shelters from Dastak. So there are interventions in place which we can definitely link them to. And obviously, if there is an emergency, people should know that they should call their emergency number for any imminent danger.
Okay, thank you so much, Myra. Talking about the government stance on gender-based violence in COVID-19 situation and how things have been tackled from their side. Again, coming to the fact that somehow it has affected the smooth running of the states in these particular days. So, what should be advocated for the response to gender-based violence on government's behalf, and how can healthcare workers help women or men suffering from violence at the hands of family members or intimate partners?
Okay, so the thing to note here is that yes, we are having a pandemic in like obviously in South Asia, like the peak is just starting right now, right? But and the resource allocation is going towards that. But it's also important to note that gender-based violence or survivors of gender-based violence, services to them is an essential service. Like you can't take away those safe havens or those shelters to be used for the pandemic. So what I would suggest is that to not close down shelters, which can actually be the only hope for these women. So and for example, our schools are closed, right? So those abandoned buildings could technically be used as temporary shelters for these women. For example, in France, like I mentioned earlier, they're using like 20,000 hotel rooms just for the survivors of gender-based violence. So there are steps that we can take right now during this pandemic and which can be continued after the pandemic. For example, for right now, we can set up hotlines that are available 24/7 with like high quality professionals in their homes who are able to kind of help the women through with the process, offer them mental health counseling, offer them psychosocial support, but also help them escape from situations which might be a threat to their life. And there should be a strong message from law enforcement that cases of gender-based violence, cases of domestic violence should not be belittled in the whole crisis that we're having right now. If the courts do close for civil cases due to the pandemic, the domestic violence cases should be treated as high priority, because for the survivors coming forward to report such crimes is in itself a very like dangerous thing to do. So us treating them as such with importance is very crucial during this time. So kind of like as a summarize, we should be advocating for there to be services for these victims despite the crisis that we are having. So there should be a multi-layer support structure. So as I mentioned that they will go to their family and friends first, right? So there should be awareness There should be awareness in our communities about the different aspects of domestic violence, how to kind of, look, listen, like how to spot the signs. There are signs, there are indicators, then kind of set up hotlines for them to help, then set up appropriate emergency services, etc. And this should be like, there shouldn't be standalone services. Everything should be linked together to have a cohesive support structure in place for them.
Thank you so much, Myra. And now, as we have been talking about gender based violence and domestic violence specifically, because it had been reported to go very high in COVID-19 situation, let's just have your comments on the fact that this is not a situation that has happened just now. It has been there in the past, and like we said earlier, it will be there in the future as well, if only it's not worked upon. So, what necessary interventions do you think that we should build on even after this pandemic to make sure that there's less number of gender-based violence reported in our countries and states specifically? So, Myra, we can have the comments from you first, and then Ishika, you can go.
Honestly, if only if I could just pinpoint one intervention that should be done by every country and which is very cost effective to do, is to have a functioning set of helplines available from the government, which are available 24/7 with trained counselors who can do safety planning, who can do the emotional support, who can do mental health counseling, who can do positive coping. Just creating this resource is very doable during the pandemic and definitely after the pandemic. So that's just the one intervention which, if it is brought into effect, will have a very significant impact.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Myra. And Ishika, from your side?
Yes, I completely agree with Myra. That would be an incredibly important intervention. To add to that, I would say that including women in the COVID-19 response, post the lockdown, post the pandemic, could be an important intervention in including them in the economic crisis and providing a way of income for them, so that way we can also have them coming out of their homes and participating by providing to the adding to the family income. Also, increased awareness that we have been working on for so long, but it's essential that we continue it, so that we can create a safe space for all victims and survivors, so that especially the cases who have come up during the pandemic have a platform to speak up and voice their stories.
Okay, thank you so much, Myra and Ishika. So, I would like to emphasize on one point here, that is, as healthcare providers, it is our responsibility to look into the fact that there are things like this that do exist in our society, and they are deeply rooted as causes, and there should be something, as in the necessary interventions should be taken in this particular regard. So, for that, I'm going to have final comments from all our speakers. We start with Myra.
So I just want to end it on the fact that I think we should kind of use this crisis that we're facing collectively, the whole humankind, to kind of come together and solve the issues that we have that are going on, which kind of creates a divide among us and is the root cause of the other issues, so we can be better prepared for issues like this. And yeah, I just want this to be kind of a lesson to come together and kind of see which systems we're failing in and to kind of strengthen those.
Thank you so much, Myra. And now we'll have comments from Zoya.
I think I'd like to end up on a note of some positivity or some of the things we can do in view of the problems we have just very carefully highlighted. Obviously, one take is that if you have influence, then use it rightly and very carefully. And it is just high time we have to, and I emphasize that we have to start taking our privilege in account. If we are a majority, then we need to stand up for minorities. It can be small, it can be a post, it can be a statement, it can be something as small as stopping a friend from saying something wrong. It can be, just an uncomfortable discussion with a family member or someone older than you. We have to realize that brushing this hatred we have been exposed to under the carpet and hiding from it behind the curtain of privilege is, just no longer the way to go. We have to read up, we have to grow up and, evolve our thoughts, or at least try to do so. It is our duty as a human being, and, it is their right of the victims that we do so. We can advocate for tolerance and religious acceptance. We can strive for universal health coverage in our countries to end the disparity due to financial wrongdoings. We can listen to the victims, and we can try to help them, we can try to guide them and make sure their stories are being heard and not being invalidated. The solution starts with us, and then it just gradually ends on a state level. So I think I'd like to congratulate you all and say thank you for being a part of this discussion, for listening to us and adding your thoughts in the chat box too. Because I sincerely believe that this really can be the first step or a step amongst many in your activism.
Thank you so much, Zoya, for your final comments. And now we go towards Ishika.
Thank you, Abra, and thank you everyone for joining in to this podcast. And we're very glad that you were here to listen to all of us. To summarize and give my final comments, I would like to say that a lot of human rights violations and issues have been existing in our society since a long time. And although there have been interventions to work upon it, COVID-19 pandemic has been like a wake-up call for all of those interventions and policies in place, and also to reflect and introspect upon ourselves and what we can do to help out people. So overall, I would just like to say that, even if one person is aware, is made aware about the situation, knows how to help out the victims or the vulnerable populations, then we can surely go forward a long way in bringing about a change and ensuring that whatever problems that we are facing are, if not suddenly, then gradually curbed, and we can have a wholesome society where each and every human being has access to their rights.
Thank you so much, Ishika. And finally, we have Ibrahim.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and thank you so much, all the panelists, for putting out your perspectives in such a comprehensive manner. I would like to end with a note that we do understand that are witnessing a lot of discrimination and hate crimes going on. We do identify them, but we need to ask ourselves this question: what are we doing about it? I feel that it is time for us to use the limited sources that we have, the limited avenues that we have at this point in time, and channel our energy towards it and work towards our goal, that is like achieving equality for all communities within the society. And I feel that we can do this by voicing out and taking a stance on social media platforms, by supporting all those who are working actively on such matters and who are supporting individuals. And I feel that this would be a huge step in this time of pandemic towards supporting the already existing movements, and giving them another front and another avenue to get highlighted in the entire world in front of all the organizations, and get the pace that they need to achieve that goal. So yes, and good luck, everyone. And I hope that this podcast was interesting for you guys. And I hope that you learned a lot of new things from it, and that you also imply whatever you learned in your daily lives. And, help if you see anyone become a victim to any such crime, and report anyone who is committing such a crime. Thank you so much.
Thank you so very much, Ibrahim. So, discrimination and violence is a human rights issue, really. It doubles the level of their worries and stress. And like we say, as healthcare providers, we know this, that chronic stress can lead to a variety of physical and mental problems. Despite of someone not experiencing it personally, it can be very stressful just being part of this particular society where the culture of discrimination is deeply rooted against racial minorities, women, children, and individuals of LGBTQI community. Something that is very important for all of us to understand and realize is, again, what have been emphasizing throughout this particular podcast, that just because we are not going through this does not mean that we do not have any responsibility towards the whole condition. As an individual, we should focus on our strengths to deal with discrimination and violence. Seek support systems if we are going through it ourselves, become a support system, seek professional help if and when necessary. Be emotionally strong and act like responsible citizens of our countries and the society to make this world a happy place to live in. With that, thank you so much, all of you, all our speakers, all our listeners. I'm really hoping that someday all of us together can create a change. And with this, I wrap up the episode for today. So, to all our listeners, we hope you had an amazing experience tuning in today. Thanks for listening to the Scott podcast. Stay tuned for our next exciting episode coming up real soon. Until then, stay home, stay safe. Don't forget to like and share this episode and subscribe to the channel for all the updates. Thank you very much.